Our speaker today is Lee McClish. Lee is currently the Director, Maintenance and Reliability for NTT GDC Americas, a global telecommunications and data center company. His previous positions were held with BASF, Graphic Packaging and Packaging Corporation of America, as a reliability engineer, maintenance engineer, RCM manager, and production manager. He also served in the U.S. Navy as a submarine officer. He holds a BSME, an MBA, a CMRP, CRL, and a CPMM. He is the author of a recent book, Maintenance Leadership 101, published through Reliability Web and available on Amazon. All right, you're here for training. Is it worth the investment? Lee, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Robin. Welcome, everybody. Happy Hump Day. I hope wherever you are, you're staying warm and hopefully not too affected by the wildfires out in California. And so we're going to talk about training as a worthy investment. So I hope at the end of this, they agree with me that it is. Training is one of my favorite topics. So here's just a picture of the book. She already went over all the other information. And I will say that I have a chapter on training with a lot of really good information. Some of it I'm going to cover during this and some of it not. So poll question 1, how many believe that they have an effective training program? Just kind of get a little bit of the pulse of the audience. It's obviously a very subjective one, but it's interesting to see what people are, how they're feeling about their company and their training program.
All right, Lee, I'm not sure if you can see this, but 38% believe they do have an effective training program and 63% believe they do not. I'll take the poll down now.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I have a couple quotes I thought were appropriate. I'm sure you guys all heard this. What happens if we train our people and they leave, but what happens if we don't and then they stay? So that kind of really, I guess, brings to light how important, training really is. And then I thought this was interesting. Found this that 70% of the people would leave their current organization, more for training, development and learning for employees. Really about a third of them would leave for career development opportunities. Thought that was interesting. And here's a good quote, train people well enough so they can leave, but treat them well enough so they don't have to, and then they want to stay. So agenda, talk about the types, sources of training, establishing a good program, what's effective, some tools, resources, KPIs. And as we go through this, I have a lot of personal examples that hopefully you'll benefit from. So one more poll before we get started. This could be maybe a standard you have, but how many hours do your technicians spend training each week? It can be all types of training, on-the-job training, hopefully dedicated time that maybe even track, maybe even having your shop floor system so they clock in, to training so you keep track of it. So we'll see what kind of results we get from this poll. It could be an average, maybe over the year. You send somebody to formal training, classroom training, all those hours should be included.
And Lee, since you're presenting, you may not see this, but 64% answered less than 1 hour, and 36% answered 1 to 4 hours, and no one answered more than 5 hours.
Okay. Wow, quite a distribution. Okay, well, let's hit it. So when we talk about different types of training, I mean, these are the four that I thought of that came to my mind. You obviously have a lot of on-the-job training. Sometimes that can be negative training. It depends on the individual in-house that's giving the training, what his real knowledge level is, how he does things. Does he do things the way that you as a supervisor, manager would like him to be doing things? So hopefully you've done well, choosing that person, and that there's been some kind of training that they've gone through um, in their presentation skills and how they cover things. Um, Sometimes somebody is really sharp or really knowledgeable may not be the best trainer, and so you really have to kind of screen those folks out. Of course, there's computerized, training, CBT they may call it, videos. A lot of the younger generations like YouTube, and there's really a lot of great things on there. A lot of things that I look at for home, like, how do I go do this? And it's amazing how much information is out there. It's really great. And then, of course, formal classroom training. So some of the sources I want to talk about. So computer-based training, I listed two good sources that come to my mind. My company happens to use this outfit called Vector training. So they have a lot of, they got just an expansive library. I mean, it has like mechanical elements, like brakes, clutches, how do you rebuild them, whether functionality, all kinds of electrical theory training, how do you solve circuits, all kinds of different things. And they also have like HR, elements. They'll have like maintenance organization training, maybe with how do you set up a PM plan, all those kinds of basics, program management of maintenance. TPC is another one that probably a lot of you are familiar with. And you also have a lot of good training sessions. One thing that as I looked at them and I looked at what was appropriate for my folks, it's like, well, how many hours do we want to spend on this? I mean, because you could spend a year and not be through all these. A lot of them are hour long. Most of them you can go part way through them, and it'll save, where you were the next time you log in, which is great. But I think it's incumbent upon to be very selective on looking at the individual and which training sessions are appropriate. If you have somebody that's a journeyman electrician, would be different than somebody that's a millwright. Just really be uh, very choosy on how many hours you want them to spend on it, what's effective. Another thing is really look at their learning style. How much are they going to get out of sitting in front of a computer, versus being out, on the floor, learning that way. OEMs have a lot of great training. It'd be very specific and tailored to your machine. I brought a lot of OEMs in my plants before, but I would make sure that I saw their outline. I want to know exactly what they're training on, how many hours is going to spend, how much time are we going to spend in the classroom versus going out to the machine side and looking at things. Also looking at scheduling, maybe some downtime, with the scheduler so we can open up cabinets and look at different aspects, of the equipment, not just electrical, but, mechanical things too. And then, also you can send folks to their in-house training that they have, and they may have a similar machine, there. You may have just one person do that and one person come back, be like a train-to-trainer kind of a thing. You have to really kind of look at what your needs are and what fits the best. Vendors, there's a lot of good vendors, like you may have like a national agreement like with Motion or Granger or MSC or, maybe Fastenal, all those different organizations that will bring, maybe an hour-long CAN training, to your site. And those are always good. If you have a good relationship with them, a national agreement, they're normally free. You just have to provide the donuts for it. And then, normally get more people to come. Then you have to look at scheduling of it. Can you do it between shifts? But then if you do it in the morning, then you got second shift people, but maybe you want them to come in early. It depends if you're in a union and you can schedule that kind of a thing, but maybe you have to have two sessions, one to cover, all three shifts. Third party, there's a lot of really great third party organizations out there. And I kind of have a little bit of a laundry list. I thought I'd kind of rattle off folks that, I get a lot of mailings from them, folks that I've used. But I think all these have very strong maintenance training programs. Like Allied Reliability is a big one. They obviously do a lot more in the training. IDCON, IDCON, I think they focus a lot on just training people and processes, another really good organization. Irreducio is one that I've used. They're located down in Charleston, South Carolina, and they also go out to sites. And they cover a lot of overall reliability programs and training. Ricky Smith got a good organization called World Class Maintenance. Mobius, University of Tennessee, University of Wisconsin. Life Cycle Engineering, you probably heard of. They do a lot of good things. And I've had one person go to a Marshall Institute training, and that was pretty good. They got quite a bit out of that. Internal trainers, so these are SMEs that you have, internal, who have, either just based on the job training, their experience, whether they've gone out, say as a Siemens S5 or S7 PLC, they got detailed training, come back and train your folks. You got to have those. And some of them might be training you do yourself as a supervisor or a manager. So those are all the sources that I see. When you have your program set up, you really got to have all these elements. You need to have an individual plan, where, because each individual's at a different location. If it's a multi-skilled type of environment, you have folks that when you hire them, you're not going to have everybody multi-skilled, particularly in all your equipment. You could have electricians, journeymen, you could have controls guys, could have mechanics, millwrights, all those different aspects of the maintenance background. And all of them will probably have a little bit of a different journey in how they get to where you want them to be. And it may be at some level of getting kind of a broad-based background, then you need to maybe specialize, maybe you have a specialization in controls, or being a millwright and, electrical theory and that kind of a thing. One thing I use, I think is really helpful, is to help build that individual plan, is to figure out where people are at. So I paired up with local community colleges and went through and did a national exam. There's quite a few of them out there that you can find, and maybe your local community college already has one, and I would require all my people to take this exam, and it'd usually be on mechanical, electrical theory, and general maintenance practices. You can kind of work with them to make sure that they're going to cover all the elements that you want. Your industry may have something very specific. Maybe it's oil, gas. You want to know more about piping and valves and things of that nature, and tanks, stuff like that. I took the exams myself. One, so I knew exactly what they're getting tested on. I'd be able to connect with them better. And it's always interesting to see where you kind of stack up to, what your knowledge level is. So once you get the results of that, usually it would be by maybe 3 levels is what I'm used to. Like the local level, so like right there in that region, other people at that community college have taken it, kind of see where people are, rack and stack. It'll probably give you the results of the state and where you fall in the averages there, and then for the national level. And it usually be in each area, whatever the focus area is, mechanical, electrical, and what have you. So that's really a good baseline, particularly if you're brand new, to a plant or the company, where do we kind of rank, against other industries? And maintenance is pretty similar across the industries, but just give you a good starting point. Job descriptions, I think, are really a must. Everybody usually has one, but doesn't include all the things that you need. And if you don't have an input with HR, you need to get an input. You need to really look at it in detail. And over time, it'll change. Change with technology, change with new equipment, the higher technology of equipment. As you go down your reliability journey, there should be things in there that maybe you want to attract, a certain skill set and whatnot. And that's where you can do that at. Internal trainers, of course, and it can't just be throwing them out there, say, hey, go train, Joe Smo on, brake theory. It should be very specific, and you probably need several of them, maybe a bunch of them, depending upon, the size of your facility or facilities, or your whole campus, could be 100 acres, a lot of different buildings and whatnot. So you kind of need like your team set up to make sure you're covering all the areas that you think you should be covering. All right, so effectiveness. You always got to consider, how do adults, learn. And some of them are not all the same. Some of them do really great just being book learners. They can pick up a lot. Some have to be hands-on. In maintenance, you really need a lot of more hands-on. So you have to kind of get a balance there. It's something to look at. And use a survey maybe. You can have an internal survey maybe that'll, with your operations folks, what do they think that your maintenance people are maybe lacking in? Sometimes, you have to kind of really sift through the answers. Some of them might be pretty biased. Maybe a recent, breakdown that they had yesterday, might influence, the kind of answers that you get. But you kind of sift through that, and maybe a survey like, say, the operations supervisors, maybe the operations manager, and kind of get some feedback there. It might be a surprise, hopefully not, but it'd be a good input and kind of tell you maybe how effective some of your training has been, that you've already developed and instituted. After training assignments, you can't just send somebody to, say a PLC school and have them come back and not use it. The afterwards plan should be all established before they go. All those expectations should be set up, that, hey, when you come back, you're going to train these people. We expect, maybe a project related thing. Maybe there's something about these PLCs or upgrading the PLCs, or, maybe the training they're going is to help them, steer you through, doing some upgrades, checking different firmwares and whatnot. So those are things that, to look at, and then being very diligent and deliberate about setting up training for all the folks that need to get it and scheduling it. How often should you do it? And retraining and having an annual training plan where every year, you really focus on them things. And then that guy's tagged as SME, and he knows that, he needs to have some materials ready. Maybe they need some help. Does that be a PowerPoint thing? But whatever OEM training or third-party training, they should have some pretty good information and materials they can use, to train in your building. Then the various levels. One of my plants, we had a guy, he's just a crackerjack electronics technician. And so everybody was happy to let him go out and troubleshoot and fix things. Often he'd probably find it a little quicker, which is fine. But what happens when the guy goes on vacation, or something like that? So you really have to make sure that you got somebody on the bench. So one thing I did was I tasked him with setting up a training plan. We went through every single machine. It took us, I think, 6 months to go through this. And every week we would just go in the classroom. He would bring out the drawings of that equipment. He would point out, different failures that we've had, ways to read the diagrams, because, some of them are, from different countries, and like from Switzerland or Germany, and depending upon where the machine came from. So sometimes the way you would look at the symbology would be different. So we kind of spend an hour or so on a machine and go through all that. And we did that for all the equipment that we had. And then the second phase was we would take those drawings and go out machine side. I would work with the scheduler, get an hour off a machine downtime. And then we'd be able to open all the cabinets, look at the drawings, see where all the, the photo eyes were, all those types of things. and that would really help a lot. And then the third level was I would schedule another hour, and I would have that electronics guy. He would pick a certain failure maybe that he had seen before, some way to test everybody, and everybody individually would go through and troubleshoot. They'd have to look at the drawings, so they have to be familiar with the components, the layout of the circuits, and they would troubleshoot and get direct feedback on how they troubleshot, what their thought process was, how they would get to the root cause of the problem. So it really helped a lot, particularly on the off shifts, because this, really good electronics guy, he worked first shift, so he wasn't really there on the off shifts. So that was one thing that I did that really kind of helped develop, our folks. Okay. Then tools. So training tools, I'm really, spent a lot of time in the Navy, big with qualification guides, but, they work. Do you list all the things that you expect them to know on this piece of equipment? Or, and of course, there are certain levels, like you maybe have 3 levels, maybe you have 4 levels, maybe you have a few levels, and then maybe they split the controls, or, be a much higher specialized level, whatever seems to work, with your type of equipment. But, they should include things like, particularly if it's multi-skilled, like a certain level of welding. Can they do arc welding? Can they do MIG TIG? At what level do you expect them to have? Electrical circuits, motor theory, how much electronics and controls, how much PLC training, can they read, ladder logic? Can they go in and make changes? Things like that. Power transmission, belts, what kind of belts work good? How do you adjust the tension on them? Clutches, couplings, how do you line couplings? Do you just do it with a straight edge? Do you laser line across them? Hydraulics, pneumatics, being able to read the schematics, all the symbology, what type of things about those types of systems do they really need to understand? The flow rates, the different types of valves, all that stuff. Bearings, seals are all key. I found bearings and seals were good to have like motion come in. And we probably have 3-4 sessions on just bearings. What are the types of bearings? How do you lubricate them properly? Are they the correct installed bearings? Is maybe there an improvement there, the type of bearing, stuff like that. Shop equipment, mills, lathes, those types of things. Making sure that whatever level, whether you're going to specialize, everybody can go in and use that type of equipment. Your support equipment, air compressors, maybe you have some type of a scrap baler or some kind of scrap collection system, maybe your natural gas coming in, to the plant, whatever your utilities are, those types of things are always good to cover. HVAC, maybe a little bit on, maybe office, different air conditioners they have, service, even your office, offices out in the plant, all those types of things. So to do that, you have to have a list of your equipment. When I got one of my plants, we had all kinds of PLCs. We had probably about 8 different manufacturers, and we didn't really have a list. We were just instituting a CMMS. So we had to collect that information, for the CMS, make sure we had all those assets set up. So that's part of it. Hopefully your CMMS is really robust and you have those types of lists. You can just go in and print them out and make sure you have all the list of, particularly PLCs, VFDs, AC/DC drives, those types of things, different brakes and clutches. And hopefully you have that kind of detail, broken down in the components. Onboarding is a really good one for the new folks. One, it makes you kind of look at, kind of do an inventory of your equipment, and what do you want them to learn? You want them to learn something about your CMMS. What other software packages do you have that they need to use? Of course, like clocking in, the shop floor, system, those kinds of things. But a lot of new employees, particularly younger generation, they want to be trained. They want to kind of know what they're doing. And what I use currently for my onboarding is about a 6-month process. The first week, they do all the HR training, all that safety training. They have to do HAZWOP or whatnot. That takes a while to accomplish all that. You have them, meet with different folks, peers, supervisors, maybe a manager. I meet with our new maintenance coordinators, kind of explain to them, how our PM plans are set up, some of the reliability, I guess things that we do. I want to make sure they're kind of level set and kind of know some of those expectations. And over time, you have them, start setting up PM plans or whatever their job is, planning, scheduling, and spending so many hours getting out there and learning their equipment. And of course, drawings and manuals, are they accessible? Do people know where they are? Some of them, often I go up on the internet and pull down manuals. Sometimes I go out to OEMs, hey, I don't really have a manual for this. In my world, in data centers, we're building a lot of buildings. We can't build them fast enough, right, for AI. And so our construction general contractors usually have a lot of manuals and stuff, and they dump them somewhere in SharePoint. Everybody knows where they are. So it's really good to be able to have access to them and make sure all your people know where they are. So topics, obviously equipment specific stuff, knowing how to work on equipment. Sometimes maybe you may have like a zone concept where maybe one type of equipment, you have a guy who just specializes in that area. It may be more generic. We're expected to troubleshoot maybe anything that's in your facility. Maybe you break it up. You have like a building facilities guy. He's maybe got a certification for HVAC. Depending upon whatever it is, you have to have all that kind of all organized and kind of mapped out. It's got to be kind of framework, of your training. So general training, it could be more like, so purchasing, maybe a lot of your folks will enter purchase requisitions. Maybe it needs to be on inventory so they understand the spare parts, how to get them in your CMMS, how they should be tracked of. You maybe use barcodes and scan them, those types of things. Maybe you have a lot of steam boilers. You need to have training on, steam theory and particularly how the boilers, work. How do you know, if the light is on there, properly, when you look in there for the firing, stuff like that. Maybe a little bit more on one lines, on your electrical. A lot of that should get included, but you also have a one line maybe for the building. Hey, we took a power hit. What's the one line for the building? Make sure that I get everything brought up properly and have a process and a procedure for that. Parts layouts, can they go into the manual, look at the parts layouts and say, well, I have this failure, these are the parts they need, make sure they got the right seals and fasteners and all the things that, may have failed, but, maybe I take these fasteners out, do I have spares? If it's a specialty fastener, maybe it gets damaged, when you take it apart and put it back together and, those kinds of things. EHS, of course, usually it's set up by your EHS, but, there may be specific things that you need to, cover, like tier 2 things or, different kinds of hazardous materials that you have, do your annual training for that. Stormwater prevention, SPCC training, those types of things. Maybe have a separate training topic for root cause analysis. Depends on if you have a team for that. Maybe you want everybody to have maybe at least a baseline, what it is. Hey, I'm going to be part of a RCA team. So what's the expectations that I should bring to those teams when we have those types of events? Reliability, of course, you're going to have some type of CMMS training, maybe an annual training. What I've done is I've gone in and looked at work orders. I've got really good description work orders and say, this is what a great description work order looks like. Maybe heart more on the positive, not on the negative. If I saw a couple that would just say, it's broke, those might be examples you want to bring up and use real life examples for that type of training so people can see it. Like, hey, this person went in and, picked the wrong asset, might be a good example. Maybe they picked the wrong type, caught an electrical problem that's really mechanical. I use failure cause remedy codes. They close out work orders, and sometimes I've seen where they chose an electrical as a problem, and when they were fixing a toilet flushing problem. So those are the types of things that you kind of got to audit your processes and then come up with real life examples, and don't use names, but at least they really bring it more to light and make them understand a lot better. And then you might want to talk about, predictive maintenance technologies, IR scanning. Maybe you have a separate reliability group that does all that. But people, on the floor, they understand, hey, I'm going in to fix this, where the IR scanning showed, a little bit of hotspot here. Got, tighten up that lug and whatnot, things like that. They talk about FMEAs, mean time between failure, maybe storm room management a little bit. Everybody has a part in that. If they don't do their part, you're going to have a lot of issues eventually with not having an accurate inventory. Your cycle counts won't be able to cover up totally. Planning and scheduling, what all goes into that. Those are all good topics for that. So vendor topics, so I kind of mentioned like Granger, Motion, MSC, those kinds of groups that do that. So some of the topics that I had them come in, and I would do an annual schedule, and every month I would have a vendor come in. And I did this all the time, and it was really useful. Like we'd cover roller chains, slings, belts, adhesives. You bring in Loctite, you really educate folks a lot. Bearings and seals, hydraulics, pneumatics, National Electric Code, arc flash things you have to do training on. Piping layouts, different types of valves, different types of steels, cold rolled steel, all the different, it's a 1050, it's a 4120, whatever, the material type is. What I found was that, say, roller chain, everybody thinks, oh, there's really nothing to it. And I brought in Motion, we did roller chain, and one of my senior mechanics, he'd been there 35 years, came up to me afterwards and says, Lee, I learned something today. Even lifting chains, and one thing is when you bring these folks in, it kind of makes you step back and look at your program. Am I doing the annual inspections that I should? During my inspections, am I really covering all the things that I should do? Elongation, of the links, things like that, and how you're, maybe even ladders, what kind of ladder inspection program do you have? And if people are doing these inspections, obviously should be trained, but it's really kind of more of a program thing. Are my inspection criteria, accurate, what I should have? So I really found vendor training very good. It's usually free. You get them to come in. Maybe you do have to pay, maybe it's a little bit. Try to steer them away from the sales pitch part of it. But even if you got a little bit of that, you can still get through it. Resources. I'm a really big believer in co-ops. At one plant I had, we had a 2-year co-op program where they would get a 2-year degree, and we'd bring them in. We pay them, so it's a good thing, but you really learn a lot about that person and their work ethic, their capacity to learn, how they pick things up, and then you get feedback from your department and how working with them, as somebody that's, somebody you'd like to hire eventually. And I did end up hiring, 2 farm boys. They brought a lot to our department. They proved themselves out. They weren't going to go anywhere. They grew up in that area. It's another good way to get good folks. And you kind of train them how you want them to be trained, and they get a good background in all their schooling, that they bring with you. It kind of helps raise the whole department's, knowledge level. So that's a really good program. Sometimes you get grants, from the state. Maybe you're in a state where they still have apprenticeships. Also, adult education is a good thing. Some of the grants, it takes a little bit of work, but I found like the local community college could help you. or they can at least alert you. Um, the one community college, they would have like different peoples and industries come in, maybe once a quarter, maybe twice a year, and you would talk about their curriculum, and you could give feedback to them. And so if you're in like a working group like that, you get a lot more communication about grants and things like that. Maybe your company pays for tuition, towards a degree, or maybe hopefully they at least have a training budget. It's a very specific targeted, PLC you need to learn on, or maybe just an electrical training program. So after the one company I had where we did the national exam, or not the exam, well, it was kind of a test, and seeing where you rack and stack. And out of that, I worked with a company for a year-long program in certain electrical classroom training. Now you had to work with the union, get permission and get everything established right, and make sure HR knows, what you're doing. But it was one way that I really brought everybody's knowledge level up. Is we did use a local community college to do it, and you can do it in your building. You can send them out, whatever you feel more comfortable. If they're in the building, there's always that tendency to go grab them and, hey, this machine's down. So you have to kind of work through what works best for you. Adult education, there's a lot of good training out there for that. Veterans may be able to use the GI Bill. It might be a good benefit. So those are some of the resources that you can use. Any inhibitors, okay? Do you have time? Do you have the budget? Hey, we're cutting the budget. Some of my companies, I would just push that budget a little bit past, and sometimes somebody would say something, sometimes not. It just depends on whether you want to ask for permission or forgiveness, what your philosophy is, and not what you necessarily get away with, but what you can get away with and within reason, right? And then, documentation. That's, if you don't have it, it's kind of hard to get it, but you gotta go out and get it. If you have old machines, 30, 40 years old, maybe there's been so many, red lines, or maybe you haven't had red lines to diagrams. You may need to bring somebody in and create those P&IDs because you don't have them. It's well worth it as long as you're going to have that piece of equipment that'll help reduce your downtime. So good areas, KPIs. I mean, how are you going to prove to management that this is worthwhile? I mean, of course, you should be keeping track how many hours are spent, for every technician. How much does it cost? Labor is obviously part of the cost, to keep track of. Sending them out, it's not just the course cost, it's the travel cost, and those kinds of things. You really should have kind of a goal. You can kind of maybe do some Googling and look at what some companies do. There's a lot in the SMRP database that talks about training. And I kind of list down here, they have a return on investment. They have a calculation, and their calculation is your business benefits minus the training cost divided by training cost, right? That's your return on investment for it. So in your reliability program, are you tracking your wins, right? So if this motor keeps failing, it's failing, every other month, and through your training and your program, you reduce that to maybe once a year. There's a definite business benefit there that you should quantify. And that just is one example. But you can look at maybe a whole piece of equipment, maybe downtime. Of course, you're going to keep track of your downtime. And hey, we're really focused on training. I had somebody come in on this one piece of equipment. This is how much we have for downtime this year. Next year, this is how much downtime we have. And hopefully it went down, it was reduced, based on the training that you had that was very selective. Maintenance rework. How many times do we have to go back and fix something again and again and again? And that, it should be a good KPI that you have that you're tracking. And part of that could be with parts. How many times I have to keep reusing these same parts? course, you have to look at where they all get used and maybe a common part across several machines or, a couple of departments, but you can factor all that in. But that's another really good way to show that you're improving. And professional development, not just your people, but yourself. What certifications and conferences and things are out there? There's a lot of good certifications out there. I'm sure you heard of the CMMRP, the CMRT for technicians, RMIC by the University of Tennessee, CRL by Reliability Web. The CPMM is one through the Association of Facility Engineers. CRE, is one of those by the ASQ, Association for Quality. It's one that it's kind of interesting. I haven't really delved into that much. And there's every PDM technology. They got all the levels, right? You got IR level 1, 2, 3, vibration analysis. Some of them are like a master level. Which ones make sense, for your type of equipment, your teams. Planning and scheduling, there are certifications for that. I never really looked at that 20 years ago, but we have our coordinators, go through that. University of Tennessee has a really good one. About a 6-month process, but it really kind of helps because you get a lot of synergies between industries. You're not just pigeonholed thinking about only, what your plant does, or maybe just what your company does, but what are the other best practices out there that, we could take advantage of? Big believer in conferences, not just the networking, but, some of the bigger ones, they bring in their vendors, they show their wares, you can bring specific problems that you have, you can, a lot of problem solving and what more, technologies are out there to help you. Some of the big ones that I'm sure you probably heard of is MarCon by University of Tennessee down in Knoxville, is usually in March. SMRP, unfortunately had a problem with a hurricane this last fall, but that got canceled. That's a really good one. They'll have 200 some vendors. A lot of these conferences have pre-conference things, so they may have like very specific reliability type of things. It could be planning and scheduling. It could be a certification. One conference I went to, and at the end of the day, they offered a CRA exam. You can take and get, certified, and that's always good. IMC through Reliability Web, they've also brought back their maintenance conference. They do Maximo. The reliability conference. Your CMMS probably has one. There's a mainstream, maintenance conference. A lot of good conferences out there. And I've taken my team members to them, and it's really kind of broadened their horizons and made them think, oh, geez, here's some solutions and some things we can look at when you get back. And usually when you're done, you're kind of pumped up a little bit and excited and kind of bring that energy back to your site. Trade magazines, if you don't get them, you got to. Plant services is a really good one. Wilk does a great job with that. Plant engineering is another really good one. Reliable plant, there's uptime, through Reliability Web. Some really good ones that really make you think. Yeah, they have some standard contributors, certain areas they focus in. Some of them do like an annual review of like your salary. They do some on, predictive maintenance, different things. All those are really good. Plant engineering, they have like these tips and tricks and how do you accomplish different maintenance things, somebody has really been ingenious has come up with. So that's really good too. Books, I'm a big reader myself. Go buy a book and read it, maybe one a year, or set some goal. Maybe even a leadership book. One thing I do, and I actually put in my my personal goals, and I get graded on through my company, is a leadership book. I make sure I read a leadership book, every year. And STEM's good. Part of this development might be you get involved in your local community college, maybe your high school, and help with teaching STEM different things. It's a good way for networking with the community, and get kids interested in the maintenance environment. So my abstract, this is the things I put in there. How do you decide if it's worthwhile? Well, hopefully the KPIs kind of lead you that way. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time to build that. And you're going to have some turnover. How's your bench strength? How are you planning your personnel rotation? And cross training, all those kinds of things. And all that goes into, is it effective or not? There's different KPIs and things that you'll know. How much internal versus external? That may change. If you really have a lot of work to do, you're probably going to have more external training in the beginning. Maybe after a couple of years, more internal training. You get more people, trained. You may want to eliminate the external training, particularly like with vendors. But I would say maybe 50-50, and I think it would change maybe 70-30 in the beginning and shift to 70-30 at some point. And weighting your development versus business needs. So hopefully you're looking at doing mean time between failure. Why do you keep having these failures? Those types of things that kind of steer your program, to help improve and reduce downtime. And then linking it to your department performance, looking at probably keeping graphs of downtime of different machines. Is it getting better? All those go into it. So some of your takeaways, hopefully, it's different sources and tools, the retention of it. I know one of our plants, they had in Milwaukee, had a big Harley Davidson plant, just down the road. So we get somebody really trained on different PLCs and things, and guess where they'd walk? Well, hopefully you can work with your HR so you're competitive, but there's a lot more to work now, Dave. I think it's not just money. I think money is one of the smaller percentages of reasons why people work where they work. Hopefully in your department you do things like, take them to a ball game once a year, or do things off site. You do things to not elevate people, but to recognize good performance. All those kinds of things go a long ways. So I think the bottom line is, I think training is worth it. I hope you agree with me. The last thing is just make sure that you maintain good documentation while the training that you do. So you can prove to management, what you've done. You have, different records they're keeping with the HR folks to show all the classes they've gone to and things like that. So that's a little bit about training. I hope it's been worthwhile for you and everybody took away something and learned it. And ready for questions.
All right, Lee, thank you again for another great presentation. At present, I just have a lot of kudos for you. Spot on, great job, that type of thing, but no questions. So I'm going to open it up to the audience and give you a moment. Going once, going twice all. So if you have anything to put in, go ahead. If not, we will thank Lee for his time. Thank you everyone for joining us. Again, thank you, Lee. And I will close the webinar for all now. Thank you all.